Coaching Friday. Let's go ahead and get started here. So first and foremost, if you want to participate in the questions, join the Facebook group in the details below, and I'm putting up a little banner here so that people know how they can ask questions for those who want to participate in Free Coaching Friday. So you have to join the Facebook group to ask NATO questions, see details below. So that way it's not too confusing to know how do you get me to answer your question, because basically I used to not have a very big following. I was a very small channel, and I'm still a small channel, but at some point I've gotten to the point where I can't have the one-on-one conversations like I used to, which is one of my favorite things about doing what I do, which is a challenge. So I started a Facebook group, since it's a little easier, since it's not quite, the same as having all those one-on-one conversations, but there's just a lot more folks joining us now. So, and for those who've been following me for a long time, I know you've been along for the journey. And it's been a fun ride. And so now we're just growing. So anyways, this is Free Coaching Friday, where I am NATO and I answer your questions about cybersecurity. And happy Friday. Thank you for joining. And as folks are getting connected here, what I want to talk about is just the questions that I get the most, because it's the beginning of the video. Questions I get the most are things like how to get a job in cybersecurity. And one thing that I've done, because I do get those questions quite frequently, is I, over time, started packaging all of the answers to the questions that have been getting people jobs together in one place, just because it's really hard for me to figure out how to make myself scalable. So what I've done to make myself more scalable so that people can actually learn the things that I always teach is on my website, noshapoint.com, which is down below. If you just look in the details below, there's a link to this. But I use the questions I get asked the most, like time and time again without fail, are all packaged in this package right here, and you can still talk to me. It's just, in the past, if someone messaged me, I'd get back to you pretty quickly. Now it's like I have to make sure that I get back to everyone, so sometimes it can take me a little bit to get back to folks. So I've put all of the most important answers that I've always answer over and over again here, because I've always just helped people get jobs for free. That's just something that I've just always done. Anyone who's known me for longer than a year, longer than 6 months, knows that I just help folks get jobs. It's just what I do. Some people, I guess, watch a lot of Netflix. I watch Netflix. And then when I'm not watching Netflix, I like helping people get jobs and things. It's why now I'm doing Free Coaching Friday, so that I can help more people, because there's a lot more of us as we grow into a community. And the Facebook group has now passed 100 people. So welcome everyone. We've gained, I think, definitely over 20 new followers. I don't even know in the Facebook group. So anyone else who wants to join, the details are, I believe, in the details below. But anyways, yes, it's all coming together, and it's all happening. So anyways, this is just a free package I'm just letting everyone know about. And like I said, this is a compilation of like answers I used to provide over and over again. So I've packaged it all. This is enough info to get a job. You can get a job for free. You don't have to go pay a lot of money for anything to get a job. So what I want to talk about today for Free Coaching Friday is I do get a very significant amount of questions about a couple of things here, like Golang, Python, what language do you learn? And then, how can you ease into learning technical skills? It gets complicated. It really gets complicated. So, but we're going to talk about it. But the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about an architecture that I put together to kind of help make the learning process easier. Because learning cybersecurity, if anyone is not already a veteran who's learned things, like anyone who's new and trying to learn cybersecurity stuff for like the first time ever, and you're like, I have no idea what any of this is. How am I going to learn this stuff? Anyone who's a vet, it's like, well, I already know these things. Well, this is not for you. You know things. If you don't know things and you're trying to get on that level where you know things, one of the things that I've done is I've started to take the kinds of automation models and designs and DevSecOps stuff that I used to use for just developing just about any tool, because I used to just develop all kinds of tools. So what that turned into is we have created a platform called the Olympiad Platform. I'm going to just kind of go over. Basically, you can learn things with Docker. If you can run Docker, this is all free stuff. So everything that I'm talking about today is stuff that you can do without paying money for anything. And if you want to start paying for things, you can do that too, which is what, yeah, anyways. So Olympiad. Let's talk about the architecture that I've put together here that anyone can really put together. It's just made out of open source stuff. It's a platform. You can build it with a Raspberry Pi, which is what I like to build and design on. But you can build it in anything that'll run Docker, anything that'll run Kubernetes, anything like that. And if you've never heard of Docker and you've never heard of Kubernetes, you're normal. If you've heard of Docker and Kubernetes, statistics, if I were to go and pull up the data, most people don't actually know what it is. So you're rare just by knowing actually what it is. If you know what containerization is, you're rare. So for you rare folks out there, you're going to immediately understand what some of this stuff is for the Olympiad. For those of you who don't necessarily know what some of this stuff is, the Olympiad is a tool that I've been putting together out of open source technologies that's really based off of a combination of what's called Docker, which you can download and take a look at. It's a tool that has, free options for playing with. And then the other one is Kubernetes. And the nice thing about these is Docker and Kubernetes, see, if I go way, way, way back into my background, into the work that I used to do, is, I did malware analysis and all these different types of things. And one of the things that I did when I was doing malware analysis was I also was a compatibility engineer. So let's say that we wanted to recover data from a hard drive. And at the time, Apple and Windows machines did not talk very well. They weren't very compatible. And so someone would have an Apple hard drive die and they'd be like, I need someone to be able to get this data, and most shops wouldn't be able to get the Apple data. So I would do things to make Windows machines talk to Apple machines and Apple machines talk to Windows machines. And so something that has always been important to me is compatibility, and I like things that just work on everything. And this is because it's just convenient. If you have things that work on just about everything, it doesn't really matter what kind of computer you're using. It doesn't matter what kind of operating system you're using. It doesn't matter if you spent $6,000 on a computer or $600 on a computer or $100 on a Raspberry Pi bundle. It doesn't really matter how much money you spent on the hardware. With we have all these modern tools, and Docker and Kubernetes make it easier than ever to make compatibility and accessibility possible. Compatibility and accessibility used to take months to engineer. Like, people would pay like $18 an hour for me to spend 4 weeks trying to get their stuff done for 4 weeks, which my payout wasn't very good for that at the time. But I mean, if we just say, I'm just gonna calculator it because I feel really lazy right now. So if we say 40 hours a week times 18, that's $720 dollars a week. So then we can just say times 4. So basically, people would pay like $2,000 for me to recover data on something that was like incompatible, or do things to help make things more compatible and stuff like that. So that was just, that's just what people would have to pay, because there weren't any options or alternatives, and there wasn't even a good way to start doing something in the first place that would let you just do whatever you want on any system without having to make it complicated. I don't like complicated things. Complicated stresses me out. So if you're like me, and technology is already complicated, I don't like that technology is complicated. So I try to find things that help simplify it for me and that I can save it so I can learn it one time, do it one time, and 3 years later I probably never have to touch it again, and I don't want to have to touch it again. I want it to work for me and then just stay working that way, and then it's like I don't want to have to redo things if I don't have to. So Docker and Kubernetes make this so painfully easy, and this is why I came up with an architecture that works with these tools in particular. So let's take a deeper look at this. So if I say the Raspberry Pi is what I build the Olympiad on, this is what I like to develop on. And I'm going to show you something rather interesting, because I'm going to show you why do I like to develop on a Raspberry Pi 4, but why do I not tie myself down to a Raspberry Pi 4. I use a Raspberry Pi 4. I use OS 10 in my office. I have 2 Macs on my desk. I have a Windows machine right next to it, running 2 Windows ecosystems on it. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, at least 4 Linux boxes on my desk hanging out here. I have you know, a little sock screen hanging out. You know, I want to use everything. This is me, okay? So I'm half crazy. So I'm not saying that everyone needs to be crazy, so don't necessarily go and be crazy. But if I have all these different things, it makes me lose my mind if all of them can't just work the same way. It causes me anxiety. It makes me not want to move forward with my day. So Raspberry Pi 4. This is the foundation of what I like to build the Olympiad on. And on the Raspberry Pi 4, we have Docker, then we have Kubernetes, so we're going to just cram these on our Raspberry Pi 4, because that's where they're going to live. And I'll tell you what most people do when they have Kubernetes and Docker, which I'm not going to do, and I've gotten some questions on why. So I'm going to talk about why do I make things the way that I make them. So I have Docker on a Raspberry Pi, and I have Kubernetes on a Raspberry Pi. Normally, when people put Docker and Kubernetes together, they usually like to blend them together. You can install them together and make them work together and make them be like one creature that just works, and they hang out and have fun. So instead, something that happens with Docker is so Docker basically is a container engine. It's something that you build these things called containers on. And then we have this thing called Kubernetes, and Kubernetes is a little odd. So Kubernetes just needs a container engine. So if you have this tool called Docker installed on a Raspberry Pi 4, we're going to get to making this make sense. If you install this thing called Docker on a Raspberry Pi 4, then you have the ability to start working with these things called containers. And so now we have this container engine, we've installed it, and then let's say we wanted to install Kubernetes. If you install Docker on OS 10 or on Windows, it actually has a little like user interface that automatically has a checkbox that installs Kubernetes. And if you click that checkbox, if you're using Windows or OS 10 with Docker, then it will naturally do this thing where it'll say, okay, you have Kubernetes. Kubernetes is going to run on top of your Docker engine. Well, there's something different. So when we get to more, I guess, if you get into more like enterprise level work and stuff like that, there's another type of Docker engine called Container D. I don't think the capitalization really looks like that and how it works. But Container D, this is a little interesting. It's another container engine. So we're going to get to how this actually matters to learning something and building labs and learning things and stuff. So we have containerd, that's a container engine. Well, Kubernetes, okay, so if Kubernetes can sit on top of Docker, well, Kubernetes can't just live on a Raspberry Pi. We can't do that. So what we can do, though, is we can put a containerd engine on a Raspberry Pi, which is separate from Docker. Now, this is going to get a little confusing. So now, if we have containerd over here, we have a new option where we can say, maybe I don't want Kubernetes to run with Docker. Maybe instead I'm going to have Kubernetes run on top of containerd. Now, this does something really strange on a system. This does something really strange on a computer. And when you're doing cybersecurity, this is actually valuable, or if you're doing like DevSecOps, really this is awesome for DevSecOps. I'm going to show you why this is awesome for DevSecOps. And what's DevSecOps? DevSecOps, well, it's basically development security operations for developing things, generally for continuous technologies, and operations engineering, which is if something's working all the time, then that's ongoing operations. So whatever you're doing on your day-to-day operations and systems that run on a day-to-day, you know, those are your operations. Someone has to keep those systems running. Those are operations engineers. So if we want to be able to create technologies that can run continuously and learn how to work with these types of technologies and figure some of this stuff out, Docker and Kubernetes actually have their own little contained ecosystem. So in cybersecurity, we have malware and we actually analyze it. And sometimes when we analyze stuff and we experiment, well, if we're doing tests, Docker is really easy to do tests on. But if we're testing things that are rather, you know, questionable, maybe we should have something that's separate from something that we actually care more about. So we can come over here and we can do tests, and things are rather inconsequential in Docker. And if something bad happens, who cares? As long as we make sure that we understand how Docker is vulnerable and make sure that we learn how to protect Docker. And so if we learn how to protect Docker and keep the Pi generally safe, and then have this Kubernetes thing over here, then this gives us another opportunity for one of the strangest things that technology has made possible in recent years, which is actually really incredible to me. And this is why we created the Olympiad, which I'm really excited about. And actually, like I said, it's all open source tools. Everything we use is stuff that's free to use, free to build. You can build businesses with this stuff. You can build products with this stuff. And let's get to it. Kubernetes is where you can host production, which is basically things like products or services, where you can have products and services that you basically build in Kubernetes. And this Kubernetes environment over here, where maybe you test things, you do your experiments here, make sure that it's starting to work and all that good stuff. But, you know, if Kubernetes needs a container engine, let's just kind of free this up. It doesn't really matter where Kubernetes lives. This is actually going to get even more interesting as we get into this, because all Kubernetes needs, once again, Kubernetes needs a container engine. That's what Kubernetes needs. So as long as Kubernetes has a container engine, we're in business. So right now, the Raspberry Pi 4 has a container engine. Then we have the ability to have this Docker environment for testing things, and then this separate environment for building and doing production things. And then it gets even more exciting from here, where we can then basically expand Kubernetes into the cloud. So, you know, you could use a tool like, there's actually you could get Google Cloud and then use Kubernetes with Google Cloud and make it to where you engineer with the Raspberry Pi 4 and you do all your tests on the Raspberry Pi 4, and then you make sure everything's good, make sure the vulnerabilities look nice, and make sure everything looks clean and all that fun stuff. And then all of a sudden you're like, okay, I have a product. So the product, you can say, we have to have a place where we can centralize the two. So we're going to say basically you can save images in the cloud using the tests, and then once you have everything kind of set up where you have like a cloud connection set up and established and you have a cloud workflow set up and established, interesting thing is when you send stuff to the cloud from your tests, if you're using Docker, you can save things in a nice, safe, isolated, contained place, which is essentially something like Docker Hub. And then this is where it gets really cool, in my opinion. When you just want to do certain updates, you can come up with a workflow, and then basically you can let your tests constantly contribute to updating your cloud. Test, update, test, update. And then you have this central system that you just build on. And interestingly enough, this one Raspberry Pi 4 system that you engineer, you could cluster it into 50 Raspberry Pi 4s if you wanted. Actually, the limit for Kubernetes for clusters is 5,000. So you could keep scaling up to 5,000 Raspberry Pi 4s if you just keep needing more development resources, and just keep scaling up your Raspberry Pi 4s. And then if you need more power than the Raspberry Pi 4 has, not a big deal. You could even spin up some extra cloud things. But why is it that we don't just develop things in the cloud? This is a rather interesting question. Why don't we just develop things in the cloud? Cloud charges by the hour if we develop in the cloud. So if we want to develop in the cloud, then cloud's going to charge us by the hour during the times that we access it. So if we're developing, well, it's free to develop on a Raspberry Pi, or you can spend all kinds of money doing all of your development in the cloud, which if you have the money, you'll get more power, other things, but not everyone has millions of dollars just falling out of their pockets every day. You trip, you fall, and oh, I just found a pile of cash in my face, and then you can afford that cloud money. Cloud money, right? So not everyone can afford that cloud money. But you know what people can afford? If AWS, depending on what resources you're using, might be $30 a month, for $60 you can get a Raspberry Pi 4, and for $100 you can get a Raspberry Pi 4 bundle, stuff like that. And if you want an 8 gigabyte Raspberry Pi 4 with more RAM or something like that, that's still under $150 generally. And then if you're paying a monthly rate for certain things in the cloud, then you don't have to keep paying more money on the monthly rate if you're a lightweight operation. Now, big corporations that make a lot of money, that's something that's affordable. But like if you're just an entrepreneur, or you're a small-time developer, or you have limited resources, limited time, limited everything's limited, you can get a Raspberry Pi 4 and start launching services. If you've ever worked in cybersecurity and you already know how to develop these things, bam, you see this right here, and there's a roadmap to your freedom. I mean, quite frankly, it just works like this with the modern technologies. And then for those who haven't learned this stuff yet, and you don't yet have the skills, this is called DevSecOps. So really, this is more or less what I would call a DevSecOps playbook, where I'm just giving you how this rundown is capable of working. It's a little more complicated than that. It's not quite so simple, and honestly it could take up to 3 years to develop something like this for like a fully fledged business, but still, in terms of development, it still drives development costs way down, because development's going to take like 3 years anyways. And so if you want to pay a lot more money for development for those 3 years, or a lot less development for 3 years, development's expensive. So anything that you can do to make something affordable for you to make possible or learn it, the cool thing about it is you can use, here's my favorite part. This is probably one of the most important parts on this entire thing. Docker is like beginner heaven, in my opinion. It's, you know, it's not necessarily the simplest thing. It's not necessarily the most straightforward thing, but in terms of like cost and trying to see what you can learn for, you know, what you can do and availability, and then the fact that you can learn something on Docker on a Raspberry Pi and migrate it to a multi-million-dollar infrastructure, migrating from a Raspberry Pi to multi-million-dollar cloud cluster infrastructure, that, you know, that's something that changes things for small time developers and small time people trying to figure this out for the first time, where once technology has become so accessible that people can do stuff that used to take millions of dollars to build and engineer and design. Once upon a time, I was running data centers where we had 4 gigabytes of RAM systems that were 32-bit nodes all clustered by the hundreds. I mean, I don't know how many. Maybe it wasn't by the hundreds. But either way, back in the day, that however many servers it was like a wall of them, and I was just like wowed by it. So don't hold me to the exact count of how many of those servers there were. But then I saw that Raspberry Pi 4, and I'm like, oh, I hosted on systems like that with power resources like that, and I can do that for myself. And you don't need data centers and all this stuff. And then, you know, with cloud, driving your cloud development costs down frees you up to be able to, you know, develop on the Pi. And like, what if you don't have to worry about your cloud bills going up and up and up the more time you spend trying to develop in the cloud. You don't want to do that anyways. And I mean, people who have like a nice laptop, or if you've been a developer, for people who already have resources, that's, you know, that's one thing. So you already have resources, this stuff, it doesn't matter. So it's just affordability for folks who need affordability. Not everyone necessarily needs affordability, and I'll be honest about that. Some folks are like, I don't know what to do with all the money I already have. Some folks are like, I wish I had money I didn't know what to do with. So everyone's in different circumstances. What did I do with my first one? My first Raspberry Pi. My first Raspberry Pi, what did I do with my first? When I got a Raspberry Pi for the first time, I wanted to build Elk Stack on it. That's pretty much all I was like, I'm going to turn this Raspberry Pi into a sim. And so actually I like to build sim on Raspberry Pi because I come from building sim. I worked at Logarithm for a long time. Great people on the team. I will never forget those people. And I still keep in touch with, hello, those of you from who I've worked with. So anyways, sim is something that I like to build into the Kubernetes thing. Like, so sim was the first thing that I did with the Raspberry Pi. I was like, yes, this thing can run sim. So I was pretty stoked about that. It's kind of nerdy, I guess. So anyways, there's some information about what the Olympiad is. So all of this, if I just put a final label on it, this is the Olympiad. This is what the full architecture is. So if you know what these tools are and you know how to design this, you can actually go and just build this exact thing right here. And this is the Olympiad. I have a guide for actually building the foundation of this already. It's on our website. So if anyone just wants to see the base thing, if you go to noshapoint.com, I guess the homepage of noshapoint.com, there's this, for DIY engineers, there's this Olympiad white paper, and this doesn't have the full architecture put in here. This mostly just has the Docker basic architecture in here. So the full architecture, I haven't finished releasing the full architecture in a tangible form beyond the whiteboard right here. This is now officially the most tangible form of the Olympiad in its full glory. So one thing in it is, this is where we do we also do threat intelligence engineering in the Docker area. And so then that's something that you can basically have data that sends over from the Docker environment, where it goes and sends data over to the SIM. And then the sim basically just receives data where in a way that makes it non-volatile to the ecosystem. So we can do all the crazy stuff over here and let the sim read the data in a way that keeps it safe and contained. And that's the rest of the architecture of how the Olympiad works. And you can build Elk Stack in Kubernetes, stuff like that, or Tick Stack, or there's a whole bunch of stacks. I don't know if anyone's built Graylog on a Raspberry Pi. We've tested Elk Stack. I tested Tick Stack. Now, another one that is a useful sim for anyone who doesn't know options, there's one called NEMS, which is probably the easiest lightweight sim out there. So that's just called NEMS. So that's a sim. And that runs on Raspberry Pi in containers. If you can't figure out how to get a sim running, try to get NEMS running, and NEMS will let you run a sim. Throw that in Kubernetes. Bam, there you go. So this is probably the fastest, most accessible way to just quickly try to build the full-on Olympiad, and then threat intelligence engine, send that data over to your sim with syslog or something. And then let me just see what other questions. All right, so hopefully that answers a lot of the questions that I've gotten. I have a lot more questions to answer, but anyways, once again on the website you can go and look through the foundational, just here are the basics to kind of get started, to kind of get things somewhat designed, and now you have seen a roadmap to the rest of that. And the benefits of all of this is that it's basically like a developer wonderland where you can just make things, all kinds of things, and experiment with them and see what they do. One of my systems died, and I don't know why it doesn't work. But that's okay. I should actually see what happened to that one. It's the one that I do all my development with. I finally did something to it when I was supposed to host something for a training today, and I ended up having to do a different lesson because my normal test environment didn't work. Okay, so apparently I need to update this, but I'm not going to worry about that because this is a test system. So this one right here is the Raspberry Pi in the Facebook group. That's actually this one. It's finally all plugged in and running. It's powered with power over Ethernet is what it's called, which basically it's powered by an Ethernet cord. I wonder if I have a picture just of what that looks like accessible. I should find a picture of that. It's kind of neat. I've got one. I've shown the inside of it before, but it's still kind of neat. So this was built by Jordan Anderson, done with the 3D printer, a massive heat sink. This thing has, look at the size of this heat sink. It's the size of the entire Pi. So we have a case, and then the case has a massive heat sink the size of the whole Pi, and a fan down there that blows upward. And this module right here is what allows the Raspberry Pi to get power from the Ethernet port. And then it has just a really powerful fan down there. If you see a little brown fan, that's just a good quiet fan. It's called a Noctua fan. So, yes, question, is the threat intelligence engineering in your Pi'd Hacker full course? Yes, the Pi'd Hacker full course is how to learn the methodologies for DevSecOps so that you can learn how to engineer the threat intelligence. And then basically it teaches you how to rely on use cases for engineering instead of step-by-step guides. So the full Pi'd Hacker experience, because someone asked about it, right here, if you have the prereqs prepares you for the Pi'd Hacker experience. But the full one, it's a DevSecOps workshop where you basically, it teaches you code theory. It teaches you the scientific method and how to rely on it when we're doing this type of work anyways, and how to work with the scientific method with data science in particular, very specific. And then it also teaches applying first principle thinking to your development so that you can basically build with any form of code, any type of platform. And I focus on methodology because methodology makes it easier to be platform agnostic. So if you want to be platform agnostic, then yeah, if you want to be platform agnostic, then learn methodologies instead of technologies. Like if you want to learn Docker, that's learning a technology. If you want to learn golden image engineering with containerization or just images, that's a methodology. And then it doesn't matter if you're using Docker, Kubernetes, it doesn't really matter what you're using if you focus more on methodology. That's what the Pi'd Hacker full experience teaches. So that basically you, by the end of it, can do just about anything. So we do 4 different role plays where you basically, we walk you through how to set up the Pi, configure the base foundation, and we're adding straight up walkthroughs. And actually, we're increasing the price to $800 when we add these DLC packs. We're adding some extra downloadable information with like full-on walkthroughs because that part costs a little more to produce. So that the price is going to be going up when that comes in. But basically, you have to learn how to build technology off of just playbooks. And if you learn that with methodology, even beginners can do advanced or stuff that looks advanced. So that's what the Pi'd Hacker experience is all about. It basically teaches you how to lean on methodology for producing new products and services for technology and continuous technologies. Now, the art and practice of being an administrator for a long period of time, just be the administrator of your house. There you go. If you be the administrator of your house, you'll know what it's like to be a professional administrator, especially if you have a family. But anyways, it just teaches you the skills to build continuous technologies. And so it's just one of the most valuable. Like if I just say dev, let me be honest, it has to be worth my time to teach something. So if I'm going to teach something, I'm going to teach the highest value skill because I don't want to waste my time and I don't want to waste everyone else's time. And so if I'm putting all this time and effort into teaching all this stuff, I make the Pi'd Hacker experience prereqs free and I make people pay for the skills that make the money. So if you want to get the types of jobs that just pay a lot more, then that's why I give, the business side of Pi'd Hacker is free. So if we go over to workshops, you can get the Pi'd Hacker experience prereqs for free, and that's on our website. But if you want to learn the full-on DevSecOps and get that experience, then that's going to cost. So that's how that works. And then if this includes my assistance, so I also help folks who are trying to go through the role plays. But anyways, so that's a little information on that. But if you just want to try to learn things on your own or just get started with something or try to wrap your head around things, you can just start taking a look at this with Docker. You can just start learning Docker. Anyone can start learning Docker. So that's very good questions. It's a lot of what drives me. So I'm like, well, let's teach everyone the best skills that I can teach folks, or at least the highest dollar skills that I know. Anyways, why not? So in terms of learning how to basically use Docker, and Docker, basically I've set up a little playground. And that's one of the cool things is you can set up a little GUI, and this is what the Olympiad looks like. And in the Olympiad, the nice thing about it is it's just a great way to be able to learn Linux. And you can set up games to play with your friends, things of that nature, and basically if you learn how to develop a game to host for your friends, that's straight DevSecOps education. So hosting a hacking game for your friends, if you can do that, you can work a full-time DevSecOps job. It's harder than you think, so try making some games and hosting some games for some folks. You'll find out it's actually challenging. But if you get good at that, then that's DevSecOps. It's just the skills. It's a skill set. You can think of it like martial arts. At least that's a comparison I think of it as. So if we're thinking about like ethical hacking and you're a pen tester, if you're building pre-built automation scripts and things like that, you can save these little containers and packages. So I've shown this before, but the nice thing about Docker is if you go to hub.docker.com and if I just say Notia point, you can save the things that you produce in their permanent immortal form, and that's what we're talking about here, which is, oh look, I have this thing. If I go back to the whiteboard, that's this thing right here. Saves images in cloud. And then the reason why I always go back to that thing is because it is the tether that allows me to basically have a product, have something that I can make quickly deployable. It's easy for me to share, and it keeps the cost down because I don't have to pay for the hosting. It lets me use it for testing folks. And normally this is stuff that businesses who want to do the same types of things that I do pay like tens of thousands or $20,000 a month or something, or for a short-lived project for something like this, because it just costs a lot of money using other types of resources. So since I engineer this stuff in my past, I'm just like, oh, sweet. I'm just gonna make my own tools and then make my own stuff. And then it took a long time. And that's it. It just took a long time. And now it's coming together. So, hey everyone, and thank you for joining. And I appreciate everyone who's joining. I haven't checked to see what's going on with the YouTube audience. But what I will say is, if you come over to the Facebook group, then that's where I chat with folks. It's a little hard for me to try to juggle too much at once, and so what I've been doing is working with the Facebook group, and then it makes it a little easier for me to provide these and answer questions and kind of keep track of stuff without the chat being too terribly crazy and things like that. So, and something that people are talking about in the chat is a really great little tool called Pi-hole. I've shown the Pi-hole before, but for those of you who've never heard of the Pi-hole, it's a little tool you can run on a Raspberry Pi. And if I go to the one that's working, oh, this is the wrong IP. Gotta get rid of that. All right, so for anyone who has never heard of Pi-hole, you can use a Raspberry Pi to block ads, and by default this tool just blocks ads out of the box. But an interesting thing about the Pi-hole is, more than block ads, if we go down into the bones of the Pi-hole, into its settings, and take a look at what it blocks, it also actually has a malware domain blocker. And you can then go in here and you can add new lists to this. So if you want to go and add threat intel lists, I'll show you what a threat list looks like. So this is how we actually use the Pi-hole to build threat intelligence, or accommodate the process anyways, because threat intelligence is built from a number of things and mixing things together, and then taking the things you mix together and throwing them at something, and then trying to produce some valuable information from all that data. But if we take a look at what Pi-hole's looking at beyond just the little ad blocking list right here, believe it or not, Pi-hole just looks at a list that gets updated with machine learning. And so if you have an online list that is updated with machine learning that you can even host yourself, you can actually build your own online little threat list that you manage, all that good stuff, maintain, and then just add it to the Pi-hole. Or you can look for other people's threat lists that they manage and maintain. You can say threat lists. See what kinds of threat lists we can find. So a list of the best open source threat list feeds. Heck yes, please, right? So emerging threats developed and offered by Proofpoint. We can look at some of these. Let's see if I can find one that works. Brute force logs. There you go. So you can basically get a list from this sort of thing, and this is just kind of showing a list of known brute force IPs, and it's just a list. So I'm not going to spend time showing you how to extract the list or do all the things or set up the list for ingestion. I'm not going to teach you all that stuff. That's stuff that you can do, and then basically you want to set it up to where you can just ingest a list that's ideally, this one might not be appropriate for, well, this is IP addresses. So you can use the Pi-hole for DNS and DHCP. So when you can, for anyone who knows what those things are, for someone who doesn't know what DNS and DHCP is, what I just said makes no sense. But if we take a look at what the Pi-hole has, you can actually have it manage your DNS and your DHCP and that's something you can do, and it has different options here that you can play with. Well, if you know what the difference between all these are, which I won't get into right now, Pi-hole can do quite a bit if you know what you're doing with the data in here, and if you know how to engineer data. So this is data engineering, how to engineer data, and then developing a tool with it that turns into DevSecOps. So we have data engineering, and then turning it into dashboards, that's data science. So you want to learn data science, learn dashboards. You want to learn DevSecOps, learn how to build the tools. If you want to learn data engineering, learn how to work with things like the threat lists and the all that other stuff that I just showed you, like the DHCP and the DNS. Start learning all that stuff. And then ultimately you can just kind of start learning all kinds of stuff. You really can learn all kinds of stuff, which is rather exciting. So, anyways, going back to some questions that I've been receiving, let's just talk about questions. So, number of questions. So some of the questions that I haven't really answered yet that we should talk about is, how do you learn code? How do you learn code? I would recommend just starting. Honestly. Once again, I do recommend, like, things like Docker are great, and you can use things like learning how to use Docker with Golang, or you can learn things like how to use Docker with Python. One thing I will say is that once you learn one language, it's much easier to learn another one. This is another thing I've said in the past. If you learn one language, it's much easier to learn a second one, a third one, a fourth one. I guess spoken languages are kind of like that, but really they kind of all do the same thing, and their structures all kind of depend on being organized the same way, because Python has to be understood by a computer, and Golang has to be understood by a computer. So Python and Golang have to speak the same language the computer speaks, which means that it has to speak binary. So that's something that you want to understand. Is, if anything, you could learn something like how binary works. I would say spend some time understanding binary if you really want to start getting into it, and then honestly start taking like some Golang or Python like classes, whichever ones are the most accessible. So if you have a good opportunity to start with Python, start there. If you have a better opportunity to start with Golang, I'd go with the best opportunity you can find between the two. And then once you learn one, then just go learn the other one. And then also, if you want to learn something neat, that makes it's kind of fun to learn some stuff between languages that also even works with the Pi-hole. If we take a look, I'm talking about code languages, at the blacklist on a Pi-hole, it has this thing that says Regex Filter, and it says regular expression right here. You can use this, and let me tell you what this is. Now, I don't have time to provide a full-on regex lesson. I did that earlier today, and it took 2 hours. So we're not going to be learning regex tonight. But you know what we will be doing is, let's see. If you go over to a website called regex101.com, let's see if I can like type that on the screen or something. So this website's regex101.com. This is a place where you can learn regular expressions, which is actually how you can learn parsing, which if you learn parsing, if you're not sure if you want to learn Python or Golang, you can learn regular expressions first. So my recommendation is to consider learning regular expressions and then decide if you want to learn Golang and Python. And if you learn regular expressions, you can learn regular expressions here. So you can come into Regex 101 and you can say, birds have wings. The wings, let some of them fly. Some. So we can type things in this little test string, and if you're trying to learn regular expressions, you can learn. This is the art of what's called parsing, or otherwise known as pattern matching. So let me move my face, because there's some fun little things that pop up on the little explanation here. So if I type a decimal, because people ask about regular expressions all the time, and I do things with regular expressions all the time because I think they're neat. If I type something, we get all these little matching characters. If I type wings, we get wings. And we can make wings colorful. And then we can even do something like this to change the way that we've highlighted these things. And all I'm going to say is you can take your time to learn regular expressions, because I just typed something, and if I switch between Python and Golang on this, notice that this is the same. This brings us to the concept of what's called code theory. So with code theory, it's that the idea behind code is that code has to be packaged, and if code has to be packaged in a way that all talks to the same thing, if anyone's ever built their own computer, you have to choose what kind of operating system you put on the computer. And no matter what operating system you put on the computer, if you get Python, it's not like you can't put Python on it unless it's a computer. Well, if it's a computer, you can put Python on it. If it's a Raspberry Pi, you can put Python on it. If it's an OS X computer, you can put Python on it. There are certain consistents and things that are consistent across technologies, just always consistent. And this is something that we want to think about. And so also a fun thing that you can do with a Raspberry Pi, if you really wanting to learn some interesting stuff. I wonder if I can get this to come up. Let's see if my Raspberry Pi is alive. Oh, it doesn't seem like it's alive, does it? Maybe. Aha. Maybe it is alive. Now I need to find the keyboard that's plugged into it. So I'm going to show you something that makes it really easy on the Raspberry Pi to learn code. This is actually really pretty sweet. I'm going to argue maybe the new easy way to learn code, like the easy mode. Code easy mode. Let's learn it. Let me change the title here. We're going to say easy mode to learn code. I'm serious. I honestly think this is the easy mode to learn code. I'm going to show you a secret. So Raspberry Pi recently had a massive update. It used to have an operating system called Raspberry Pi, or Raspbian. It used to have an operating system called Raspbian. If you buy a Raspberry Pi, or if you make a Raspberry Pi virtual machine, you can make a Raspberry Pi virtual machine. But if you run the new version of Raspbian, the Raspberry Pi Corporation or organization or company or whatever decided that they're going to change it to Raspberry Pi OS because of making it 64-bit as an architecture. The Raspberry Pi used to not be 64-bit as a default little tiny computer. But what that really means is that it didn't have the ability to process more than 4 gigabytes of RAM, so that's why we care about 64-bit. It means that we can use more RAM. And there's now an 8 gigabyte Raspberry Pi 4. 4 gigabytes of RAM is the maximum you get with a 32-bit computer. So now the Raspberry Pi 4 has more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. And I think this one's one of the 8 gigabyte ones. I don't even know. I have so many Raspberry Pis. So, easy way to learn code. In Raspberry Pi OS, they now have this little thing where, let me see if I can make this bigger here, because I can make this bigger. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, trust me, this is going to get bigger after it gets smaller. Oh no. There we go. Let's do this. So, I guess I could just drag it this way. I don't know. I'm new to this. I'm new to this thing. I don't know what I'm doing with this. Okay, so hopefully you can kind of see this in the top, tippity top corner here. The system's supposed to be accessible remotely, but for some reason it's not networking, and I don't know why. But that's okay. It doesn't matter. It's a vent that you guys aren't familiar with. I was going to use it earlier today, and it didn't cooperate with me. But that's because my network's crazy, and that's my fault. So anyways, Raspberry Pi has this recommended software item right here. And if I click on this recommended software item, this is new to Raspberry Pi OS. And let me move the screen so we can see what I'm looking at here. So it's going to launch this little wizard. It's going to synchronize with some things. Synchronize my clock. I don't even know what my clock says. I guess it doesn't matter. It's thinking about it. It's thinking about it a lot. You know, maybe the problem is this thing's not networked right now. Maybe that's why it's not working. Let's fix that. So things need to be on the internet. So give me a moment to get this thing to do what I need it to do. Technology. So I have like 2 separate isolated networks, and then one of those separate isolated networks has separate isolated networks inside of it as well, which makes my network very confusing. But I just need to make sure that I'm connected to the internet here. Well, you know, I'm just going to find like a screenshot of it or something, and I'll deal with that later, because I can show you this later. But anyways, now you know what to click on. Basically, you want to click on that recommended software thing, and then let's just go to Google, so I'm not sitting here watching this thing, because I'm not patient. So let's go ahead and instead go and say so if we go to the recommended software, and I have another Pi that I could try to bring the screen up, but my network's so complicated that I'll just end up confusing myself, and then everyone will just watch me troubleshoot my network. So Raspberry Pi OS recommended software. Let's see if they have like the list. I don't know. That's something that you could Google, I guess. So maybe I'll let everyone else Google that, or if you get a Raspberry Pi. What it has is it has a whole bunch of like, actually maybe this tells us. Oh, here we go. Yeah, here we go. So there's a little list here. It has Python games. That's actually something that's really neat, where basically you can learn code by building games on the Raspberry Pi when you click on that little recommended software, and it's free, and they just give you the code, and then you learn how to build the game with code, and then you can play the game. So you can basically learn code by building pre-built games with code, kind of like Legos, but they just give you the code and you piece the game together and make it play. And so instead of, you know, playing Legos, you'd be getting pieces of code and putting that together and playing games instead on a Raspberry Pi. So clicking on that lets you get this like little thing that lets you build games. So that's the one that I was going to try to show you. I'll show that off another time, since that's clearly being complicated right now. So anyways, let's see if I have any other. I do have a lot of questions. So let's keep going down the list of questions, because there's the question of how to learn languages. So I would say learn regular expressions. Try getting a Raspberry Pi and try just learning how to do the Python games and learn how to build games with Python on a Raspberry Pi. And then on top of that, you get to play games too when it works. So it makes it pretty fun, especially when you're making something work with code that you're working with yourself. It's pretty neat. So I would check it out. I would definitely check that out. And then how to ease into learning technical skills. Honestly, the best way to ease into learning technical skills might just be starting by just going to some place that has a lot of free videos that are interesting and find something that you're interested in first. Because if you're not interested in the things that you're trying to learn, then it's really hard to learn technology because it's really dry. And people will be like, what's an easy way to learn technology? Well, the reason why it's not easy to learn it is because you're probably trying, potentially, I find that when people try to force themselves to do something that they really despise doing, I see this with people who are like, they feel like they should learn code, but they despise working with code. Like, I hate working with code. And then they like spend all this time trying to learn code because they feel like they have to, because their career depends on it. Like, you could go do something else, like learn how to be an architect and barely touch code, write scripts every now and then, sure, whatever. But then, you're doing something that is a lot less stressful to you. So, I would say explore the different sides of technology as much as humanly possible. Be like, do you like messing with hardware? Do you like messing with the code more? Did you download Docker? What did you think of it? Was it hard? Did you like the challenge, or was it just something that just wasn't even interesting? You're just like, oh, this is just annoying, and it's more annoying than it is interesting. If something's more annoying than it is interesting, then go find the thing that's interesting to you and chew on that. Like, put your time into that and get real good at it. I'd say self-interest goes a long way. Being interested in something goes a long way. If you don't have the interest, follow where your interests are, and you'll find that motivation becomes possible when you thought that you no longer had any motivation. So interests make a big difference. So let me put a little tag away. So I would say, just go down Google rabbit holes, look for things online, check out free resources. If you're new to technology and you don't even know if you like it, I'd say start with free resources before spending a ton of money on something, or less expensive resources until you know you like something. And if you like it, then start pouring money into it. And knowledge is always valuable. So no matter what you do, if you're learning, you're learning. If you're learning, it's good. Keep learning. That's my recommendation. So just keep going down research rabbit holes, find the things that you like, pursue your interests, pursue the things that you get most excited about, and try to figure out the things that you get most excited about. And if you don't like hardware, try to focus on code. If you don't like either, well, if you don't like hardware or code, I don't know if cybersecurity has it also has training and education. So if you like training and education, well, then some of it goes back to involving code and things like that. But maybe, you could be a manager, different things. So if you like managing technical people, maybe that's what you like. Maybe you're not technical at all, and maybe you're the one who's social and like is a little bit of a glue and knows how to get people going and get projects going. And maybe you're just a social glue that works very well with technical people and can coordinate technical people and then, together build a crazy awesome team doing some crazy awesome stuff. I mean, that's pretty crazy awesome, right? So those are my thoughts on how to ease into the technical stuff in cybersecurity. And then, interesting question. I've been getting a lot of people starting businesses, just a lot of people starting businesses. And I get questions about things like, how do you start your business? How do you get leads? Things like that. Like, how do you even people wondering how to sell parts of their business, how to sell equity, how to sell shares, how to manage shares. I guess I am an entrepreneur, so I guess it makes sense that people come and ask some of these questions. I guess if someone's starting a tech company and you want to know things to start a tech company, and that's the part that you're interested in on the side of entrepreneurship, honestly, in terms of building a tech company, building a tech company is a complicated thing. It's mostly planning and mostly talking to people if you want to build a tech business. So I've been getting a lot of questions about business and what to do with stuff. and like questions of like, should you fund your startup with investor money? Should you go nonprofit, or should you bootstrap your business? I'm starting to get these questions. And also, do you think, like, people ask me, do you think a side business can make money? So I've been getting a lot of these questions. I would say that side businesses teach you things, and until you put your full-time effort into it, they don't generally produce a lot of monetary value unless you can coordinate a team around it that puts full-time worth of effort into something. And if you have something that goes from side job to side team, side teams make money, side jobs don't make as much money necessarily, but they can. If you are really dedicated and you get a side like little thing that you're doing and you literally just don't stop for years, the sheer time investment of just not stopping alone will probably make a side project start to eventually take off, even if it's 2 years, 3 years. Just don't expect a side job to immediately have turnaround financially. Honestly, most things that pay well have a long-term payout. Immediate gratification doesn't really work well for those who want to make maximum dollar. Immediate gratification works well for like making some fast money. I don't know, if you want to spend 80 hours a week doing really hard 10-hour-a-week work, that's easier work to get. So if you need fast cash, sometimes that's actually, in business, you sometimes have to swallow your like, okay, right now I just need to make sure that I have enough money to do X, Y, Z. What is the fastest path to cash? Tell someone that X, Y, Z for X amount of money. Like for me, like for cybersecurity stuff, I'll charge like $300 an hour. And then if someone wanted me to like mow their lawn, I mean, if they were my friend, I'd probably just do it for free. But if they were just, I don't know, really wanted to pay me, then I guess I'd be like, well, I don't know, like whatever, just give me like $10. But like, there you go. Like trading your time for money is probably the fastest path to cash. If so if you're trying to start a new business and you want to start a new business next month, start a service for someone, manage someone's security. You're like, hey, I'll manage your security for your store, your small coffee shop, or your storefront, or whatever you're trying to manage security for, and then they pay you a monthly fee and you manage their security. You trade your time, they trade you money. That sort of business is always, in my opinion, for someone who thinks like I do, it's easier than getting a job. But getting a job's not that bad comparatively. I guess it's more preferable, maybe not easier. And because I get the other question of, should I start a business or should I get a job? It depends on who you are and what you want. This sounds like a cop-out answer, but I'm going to move it from being a cop-out answer, I promise. Because I'm going to tell a story about, should you start a business or should you just work for a company? And if you work for someone else, you don't necessarily, well, maybe you do get things if you work for someone else. Because when I was working for certain companies, I'll leave personal identifiers out of it. There are some very senior people who I worked with who now basically make the same kind of money and have the same kinds of freedoms of an entrepreneur, but they work for large businesses, like the mega businesses, and they do make like $300,000 a year. I have those friends, and they live a lifestyle that's a lot more like an entrepreneur. And then also there's the entrepreneurs where a little scrappier bunch, and not all of them have a whole lot of money yet. And then when they do get money, it tends to just kind of grow exponentially and grow a lot and grow really fast for periods of time. And then sometimes they just go out of business. So a lot of ups and downs and a lot of chaos. And then the payouts tend to be rather massive. So I guess it depends on how you want to just make a living. Do you prefer working with teams, or do you prefer trying to make your own vision possible? If you want to make your own vision possible, and that's something you've always dreamed of, consider starting something. If you just love the idea of like working with an awesome team and working with like these great people around you, like I will never trade my time in business for the world because of the people. I met some amazing people, incredible people. I still talk to them to this day. People change your life. People teach you things you never knew possible. People show you things you never imagined, and you'd be like, wow, I didn't even know that was possible. And then the next thing you know, you're making some stuff, and people inspire each other. And so when you're in an ecosystem that allows people to inspire each other, you get that in a business. So you don't necessarily get that when you're an entrepreneur. Sometimes you're just all by yourself all the time. And until recently, my past 2 years, I was just mostly just alone all the time, working on like one project at a time. I'm like, well, here we go on the next project. I guess I'll advertise even though no one will click on anything or care. And so if you're running a business, it's very lonely. And some people just don't want to be alone that much. I'm very introverted. I'm painfully introverted, if I'm honest. I'm painfully introverted. So for someone like me, starting a business makes a lot of sense because I get a lot more time to kind of be in my head and be in my mind, and then come up with some crazy stuff and be like, hey, check out this stuff. And I used to do that for businesses too, but now I just do it anyways, whether I'm at a company or not. I just like to do what I like to do, and I guess it just is what it is. But other people, if you do want to be, if you don't like being alone all the time, if you really hate being alone all the time, I'm not so sure starting a business will be fun. And it's not even necessarily more lucrative. So starting a business doesn't mean more money. What means more money is doing the thing that you like enough to pursue harder by the day. I'll say that again. The thing that makes the most money is the thing that you find that you want to pursue harder by the day. So the more you pursue the things that make you want to keep pursuing, that's what will make money. Because motivation is a strange, fickle thing. You can try to force motivation on yourself. Try it for years and just make a spreadsheet of failed days of motivation. Oh, motivation's a strange thing, isn't it? Really, you just got to find the things that drive you. And with cybersecurity, it's such a wildly confusing space. I mean, if we Google the madness, like how to start in cybersecurity, like if we just take at a glance, like the first person who's like, okay, I want to try to figure out how to get into cybersecurity. How do I do this? I have no idea what I'm doing. They're going to come in here and be like, okay, how to start in cybersecurity, right? And you're going to click on a beginner's guide to getting started in cybersecurity. You have no idea what's going on. And like when you're new to something and you're trying to figure out all this stuff, like it's overwhelming enough. Like this thing's saying that you got to learn something about this analyze thing. You don't even know if that's important if you're just getting started. It's saying you got to learn something about this survey field, and you got to be dauntless or whatever they're saying. And, this sounds daunting, right? And so it doesn't even give you any strong direction. Like, so anyways, some of these give good direction. I actually got a lot of training from SANS. SANS, they've taught some good things. The thing about SANS is they're expensive. You get what you pay for. SANS, like you get like in-person training where they like come to your business and they're coming over and they're talking to you and they're shaking your hand and you're all having like a hacking tournament and everyone's in the same room and cheering and being like, ah, and like money gets involved and it gets crazy. That's SANS. But not everyone can afford SANS. SANS gets very expensive. Now, SANS does actually have a lot of free resources. So if you want to just start jumping on free resources and you're new, I do recommend SANS to anyone or everyone. But as we keep going, the problem is trying to figure out how to get into cybersecurity is basically just a fire hose. Like, it's just basically just like, this is how you get into cybersecurity. Well, actually, no, that's it's probably more like one of these. It's probably more like this one or like this one. That's probably more accurate. That's trying to figure out where to start in cybersecurity. Not the most exciting experience. Because whenever I talk to people, it's almost any beginner I've ever talked to generally is overwhelmed at the idea of trying to figure out how to understand this, or how to understand this, or how to understand any of this. Like, it just all looks completely inaccessible to someone who's never seen some of this stuff before. So anyways, that's why I'm trying to do things like, okay, so let's roll out some routine info for folks. Let's go ahead and answer questions on a regular basis. Let's go ahead and kind of show people some easy ways to do this without having hundreds of thousands of dollars in college degrees and time that nobody has. Ultimately, someone posted a good picture of a fire hose. Let's see. Someone said, oh yeah, the Pi'd Hacker experience can be followed for... So the Pi'd Hacker experience prerequisites is what makes the Pi'd Hacker experience beginner friendly. So someone's asking about the Pi'd Hacker experience. The Pi'd Hacker experience, the full workshop, if I go down here, the one that's prerequisites is beginner friendly. And this will get you to the point where you'll be ready to do the actual full paid one. But if you haven't done this Pi'd Hacker experience prerequisites package, it's all just going to be overwhelming probably, and generally very confusing, and it's just a lot. Like this prerequisites package alone is a lot. So if I just go to my workshops, I'll just show you what the package is. I don't care. So if we go over to the Pi'd Hacker experience prerequisites package, the first thing it's going to do is it's going to introduce you to tools like the Geek to English Dictionary, which is managed by Chris Roberts, which is a well-known red teamer in the general space. So those who are interested in red team, you can check out what Mr. Roberts does over here. So we got some resources. So thank you to his wonderful work to help make terms more beginner friendly, because the thing that gets really complicated with cybersecurity is really translating that geek to English, because ultimately it just sounds like a whole bunch of stuff. Someone's like, hey, did you check out that OSIC on that SIM when we had that VNC and that VPN that was flying on the syslog with all the logs? And people look at each other and they're like, wait, what did that person just say? And that's cybersecurity for you. So, we come down here and it's like, okay, so let's go ahead and bust out the dictionary, right? So we can figure out what exactly is a firewall. Maybe you never heard of a firewall. Maybe you don't know what it means to get ghosted. And maybe you don't know what a keylogger is. And I talk about open source all the time, and maybe you don't even know what open source is in the first place. And so cybersecurity is already confusing enough. Cybersecurity is already maddening enough. And considering how maddening cybersecurity is, it's actually, you could thank Lavia for finding this resource, and then Chris Roberts for producing this resource. He's a wonderful person. Lavia is a wonderful person, so thank you for helping with these things. So people who've been taking the Pi'd Hacker experience have actually influenced the Pi'd Hacker experience. When someone makes a recommendation on what would make it better, I add it to the Pi'd Hacker experience. That's one of the benefits of it, is I can just completely fine-tune this and make it better and better and better to be the ultimate package to help people get jobs and help educators have a package that helps them teach jobs. So if you already know cybersecurity but you don't know how to teach beginners, this package will teach you how to teach beginners. And if you start with this package and then one day you're trying to teach beginners, this package will teach you how to teach beginners when you're no longer a beginner. So that's one of the other reasons why I have built the Pi'd Hacker Experience Prereqs, because the Pi'd Hacker Experience Prereqs is just a tool that makes it easier to understand the foundation of cybersecurity. Now let's keep getting into this a little further. Industry basics with it. It has a whole series on where to begin. That's a lot of information right there. There's no way I could cover all of this information in this, which is why I'm like, I'll show you everything that's in here, because while it's stuff that's on my YouTube channel, you could go dig through it, but it's faster to just get everything in the order that helps you build it all. And then it goes over the OSI model. OSI model is very important. You want to understand the OSI model, and then you want to understand the concept of the OSI model for hackers. And then, there's some other people who spend more time with Python and things than I do. And then this whole thing right here, this is a playlist with 143 videos for getting the Security Plus, and this single-handedly will get you a Security Plus if you really love watching. Really, there's a lot of information. But a lot of people get the Security Plus, and it is a lot of knowledge. So boring or not, it's good knowledge. So that's in there, all in one place. And then we go down and we have more free resources. So Free Coaching Fridays for anyone who finds this before finding Free Coaching Fridays. But then I have a whole book on how to understand personal online security. So the 10 laws of online personal security. So if you're a beginner, this tells you everything you need to know about being secure and safe online. It's a full book. You can go over here and make it bigger and easier to read, all that good stuff. You can download the ebook. So this ebook right here, you can download these. And this right here is a cybersecurity interview preparation checklist that we put in here that is, my recommendations for preparing for your interviews. And then I built this cybersecurity job qualifications guide, the ultimate guide, because what this does is it shows the types of jobs at different levels. So, if you have no experience and no education, here are some jobs that you can probably get. If you have no education, if you have no experience but you have some education, here's some jobs you can get with some education but no experience. And then if you have education and some experience, here's some jobs you can get for that. And then here's how to map out a 5-year job plan so that you can start planning out your job for free. Better yet, we get down here, and then let's say that you don't even understand what red team is, you don't understand some of these other things. We have the Cybersecurity Essentials course that used to be an email course that you'd have to sign up for, but it's in here, and it has lesson 1, the biggest threat on the web. It has a little quiz right here. You can try to figure these things out, and lesson it gives you the terms. What's red team? What's blue team? What's security awareness training? How does cybersecurity work? It's got diagrams in here and stuff like that, and it's got links and scenarios. So then we go down to actually getting the job, where Livia is an outstanding, she was an outstanding student, and now she's an outstanding senior engineer. So great work, Livia, and congratulations, Livia, if you're watching. You're probably working too much to be watching this at this point. So she is now working full-time doing crazy things. So and then the LinkedIn hacks to get a cybersecurity job. This is just one of many ways that you can get a job that makes it easy to hunt people down and then basically learn what DevSecOps is. Now, a lot of these resources are on my YouTube channel, and they're scattered around the internet. This is just having everything in a place so that it's easy to find stuff, so that you don't have to basically go and do as much of this. Because there's already enough information. That package is already enough information. My YouTube channel is already a fire hose. And so it's actually even easier than using my YouTube channel, because at this point my YouTube channel is starting to just, I have like over 70 videos, I think now, moving toward 100. Like over we have like 1,700 subscribers now. So for those of you on YouTube, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And then that's cybersecurity for you. So there's a fire hose of information to everyone's face for Friday. I'm going to wrap it up, and I thank you all for joining. And yeah, does anyone have any last questions in the Facebook group? I know I said a whole bunch of things, but if anyone has any last questions, I'll answer those. But otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and start wrapping it up here. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. A few shout outs. I have a lot of shout outs. So congratulations to a couple of members starting college. One thing I need to figure out is some of you don't like your name being known in public, and some of you like your name being known in public. So I'm making a list of people who don't mind their names being shared. I'll hunt that down. But anyways, thank you, everyone. You have a great weekend. I appreciate all of you, and feel free to watch any of this over again if you need to get a refresher on some of the details that we covered. So thank you for joining. We'll be back next week, because every Friday that I'm available, we do Free Coaching Friday, which is probably going to be most Fridays, and ideally every Friday. So if I'm sick or something, or I'm doing some serious business stuff, maybe I might miss a few, but my goal is to try to not miss these. So I'll be here next week, and I've been here for the past week since I've been doing this, so I'm just going to keep doing it. So thank you, everyone.